The sea in the Middle Ages did not belong to heroes. It belonged to hunger, fear, and men who had learned that land offered them nothing. Long before the age of black flags and romantic legends, before parrots and buried treasure, piracy was already alive on cold waves and narrow coasts. And it did not begin with criminals dreaming of gold. It began with ordinary people trying to survive. Along the shores of medieval Europe, fishing villages clung to the water like barnacles. Life was hard, storms destroyed boats. Lords demanded taxes, kings demanded men for war. One bad season could mean starvation, and when the sea gave less than it took, some fishermen began to look not at the nets, but at the ships passing by. At first, it was small, a lonely merchant boat. A damaged vessel limping toward harbor, a raid done quickly, violently, and without ceremony. No flags, no speeches, just knives, clubs, and desperation. These men did not call themselves pirates. They were neighbors, sailors, sons who had nothing to inherit. Medieval piracy was not a profession at the beginning. It was a solution. As trade grew, so did opportunity. Wool from England, wine from France, grain from the Baltic, spices moving inland by sea. Merchant ships traveled predictable routes, followed seasons, hugged coastlines. And where there was trade, there were men watching from hidden coves, from rocky inlets, from river mouths where fog lingered like a shield. These early pirates did not sail mighty ships. They used what they already had: fishing boats, small coastal vessels. Long, narrow hulls that could move fast and disappear into shallow waters where heavier ships dared not follow. Speed mattered more than firepower, surprise mattered more than courage. A medieval pirate's life was not glamorous. Days were spent waiting, watching the horizon, repairing sails with rough hands, sharing stale bread and salted fish. There was no code, no brotherhood carved into myth. Trust existed only as long as it was useful. Betrayal was common, violence was constant. When a target appeared, everything happened fast. Grappling hooks thrown, oars digging hard into the water. Shouts, panic, confusion. Most merchant crews were not soldiers. They carried knives, maybe a spear, sometimes a crossbow. Often, they surrendered without a fight. Sometimes they didn't, and those encounters ended in blood splashed across wooden decks. Pirates did not usually kill for pleasure. Killing was risky. Dead men brought investigations. Dead crews brought vengeance, but fear was a weapon, and fear spread faster than fire. A few brutal acts traveled from port to port as whispers, and soon ships surrendered before blades were even drawn. What pirates wore would disappoint any fantasy artist. There were no uniforms, no matching coats. A medieval pirate wore whatever he owned. Wool tunics, patched trousers, leather belts, old boots soaked in salt. Some wore pieces stolen from past raids, a better cloak, a warmer hood. A helmet taken from a dead guard and dented by someone else's blade. Armor was rare. Chainmail was heavy, expensive, and dangerous at sea. Fall overboard in mail, and you sank like a stone. Most pirates preferred freedom of movement. Thick leather, padded cloth, maybe a shield if space allowed. They fought close, fast, and dirty. Weapons were practical, not elegant. Axes were common because sailors already used them. Short swords, knives, clubs, spears that doubled as tools. Crossbows appeared often, deadly at short range and easier to use than longbows on a rocking deck. Fire was sometimes used, but carefully. Burning a ship you wanted to loot was a mistake. Loot itself was rarely gold. That was the fantasy later centuries invented. Real treasure was barrels of wine, cloth, iron tools, rope, grain, salt, weapons. Things that could be sold quickly, things people needed. Coins were welcome, but goods kept pirates alive between raids. Selling stolen cargo required silence and cooperation. Pirates did not operate outside society. They operated within its cracks. Coastal towns looked the other way. Local officials accepted bribes. Merchants quietly bought goods they pretended not to question. Everyone benefited, and everyone lied. Kings knew this. In fact, many pirates worked for them. During war, which was frequent, rulers issued letters of marque. Official permission to raid enemy shipping. On paper, these men were privateers. In reality, they were pirates with legal cover. When war ended, the letters were revoked. But habits remained, ships remained, crews remained. And the sea did not care about peace treaties. Some of the most feared medieval pirates began as hired blades of the crown. In the English Channel, piracy became a way of life. French, English, Flemish sailors attacked one another, regardless of war status. Ports like Winchelsea and Calais became nests of violence, ships disappeared, crews vanished. And when complaints reached the king, investigation stalled, drowned in politics and profit. In the Baltic, the Victual brothers began as suppliers for a besieged city and ended as roaming pirates, terrorizing trade routes. They called themselves friends of God and enemies of all. They believed the sea belonged to those strong enough to take it. Further south, in the Mediterranean, piracy blurred into religious war. Christian and Muslim raiders attacked coastal villages, capturing ships and people alike. Slavery was part of the economy. Captives were sold, ransomed, or forced to row galleys until their bodies broke. For pirates, every raid was a gamble. Storms killed more men than swords. Disease spread fast in cramped hulls. A broken mast could mean slow death drifting at sea, and capture was worse than death. Punishment for piracy was severe and public: hanging, drowning, bodies displayed at harbors as warnings, iron cages left to rust with bones inside. The message was clear: this life ended badly. And yet, men kept choosing it, because for many, piracy offered something medieval society rarely did: choice. On land, you were born into your place. A peasant stayed a peasant, a fisherman stayed poor. At sea, a man could rise by strength, skill, or ruthlessness. A successful pirate might buy land, marry well, vanish into respectability. Some did. History remembers few of them, because disappearing was the goal. Pirate crews were harsh, but practical. Leadership was often earned, not inherited. A captain who failed lost authority quickly. Mutiny was common. Survival mattered more than loyalty. Shares of loot were agreed upon before raids, and disputes could turn violent fast. There was no democracy, but there was negotiation. A man with skills mattered: a navigator, a carpenter, a healer. Even criminals needed competence. As the centuries passed, piracy became more organized, more feared, and more political. Sea wolves turned into tools of war, then into enemies of the state. Laws hardened, navies grew, the ocean slowly became controlled. But in the Middle Ages, the sea was still wild. And piracy was not an exception to medieval life. The sea never forgave weakness, and neither did piracy. By the time a man had survived his first year as a raider, he no longer thought like a fisherman or a sailor. He thought like someone who knew that tomorrow was uncertain, and that hesitation killed faster than steel. Superstition ruled their lives as much as violence did. Certain days were avoided for sailing. Certain birds were watched closely. A broken charm could spark panic. These men lived with death so close that they searched for meaning in signs, omens, and half-remembered prayers. Life aboard a pirate vessel was cramped and filthy. There was no privacy, no comfort, and no escape from one another. Men slept wherever there was space, often wrapped in cloaks stiff with salt. Rats were constant companions. Water went foul quickly. Food rotted, hardened, or crawled with insects. When sickness came, it spread fast, and there were no doctors, only rough remedies and desperate hope. Discipline was brutal because it had to be. A careless mistake could doom everyone: falling asleep on watch, failing to secure a rope, misreading the weather. Punishments were immediate and often violent. Beatings, marooning on empty shores, or being cast overboard were all used to enforce order. Mercy was rare at sea, not because pirates were monsters, but because survival demanded it. When battle came, it was loud and chaotic. There were no neat formations, no heroic duels. Smoke from burning pitch filled the air, screams mixed with splintering wood. Pirates aimed to overwhelm quickly, to break resistance before it could form. Once control of a deck was taken, the fight was usually over. What followed was shouting, looting, and the grim work of deciding who lived and who did not. Captured sailors faced uncertain fates. Some were released, stripped of everything. Some were forced to join the crew. Others disappeared entirely. Ransom was common, especially when captives were valuable. Names mattered. accents mattered. A well-dressed merchant might survive where a nameless deckhand did not. Ports were where pirates truly revealed their place in medieval society. They drank in taverns alongside merchants, soldiers, and priests. They laughed loudly, spent quickly, and vanished without warning. Everyone knew who they were, and everyone pretended not to. Coin spoke louder than morality. A man who arrived with goods to sell and money to spend was welcome, no questions asked. Women were part of this world, though history often pushes them into silence. Some ran taverns and fences that supplied pirates with food, weapons, and information. Some traveled with crews, disguised or openly present, depending on the region. A few commanded ships themselves, feared and respected. Their stories survived only in fragments because chroniclers preferred them forgotten. As piracy grew, so did the response against it. Coastal towns fortified their harbors. Convoys formed. Warships hunted raiders with increasing success. The freedom that once defined the sea slowly narrowed. What had been chaos began to feel like control. Yet piracy did not vanish. It adapted. It moved. It hid behind politics, behind religion, behind flags of convenience. Men who had once been celebrated as defenders of the realm were hanged as criminals when peace returned. The line between hero and outlaw shifted with the tides. This is where fantasy often fails. It paints pirates as rebels with codes and honor, as free spirits untouched by consequence. Real medieval pirates were shaped by necessity, not romance. They were violent because the world was violent. They were ruthless because mercy rarely paid. But they were also human, bound by fear, hope, and the same desires as anyone else. For world builders and storytellers, this matters. A realistic pirate is not just a fighter on a ship. He is someone trapped between land and law, between hunger and danger. His choices are limited. His morality is flexible. His life is short. The medieval sea was not empty space between destinations. It was a contested world, full of invisible borders, grudges, alliances, and blood debts. Every sail on the horizon carried uncertainty. Every harbor promised both safety and betrayal. When the age of organized navies finally tightened its grip, piracy changed form. The medieval pirate faded, replaced by legends that were easier to swallow. Cleaner, braver, less disturbing. History smoothed the edges and sold a story people preferred to hear. But the truth remains, hidden in court records, ship logs, and broken laws written by men who feared the sea and those who mastered it. Medieval pirates were not myths. They were neighbors, soldiers, fishermen, and outcasts who chose the water when the land offered nothing. And if you listen closely, past the noise of later centuries, you can still hear them in the creak of old wood and the crash of waves against stone. Not as heroes, not as villains, but as people who lived and died where the world was raw and unforgiving, and the sea decided everything.